He went out to hunt his quarry, but instead he found himself with the Apache woman he couldn't leave. The morning sun was just beginning to stretch its golden fingers over the rugged mountains when John Harper tightened the straps on his worn leather pack. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Birds called softly from the distant cliffs, and the occasional rustle of small animals reminded him that life thrived even in this harsh land. John had spent years in these wilderness stretches learning the rhythms of the land, listening to the whispers of the wind, and following trails that most people would not dare to walk. Today, however, he had a purpose beyond simple exploration. He was tracking a man who had caused pain to the nearby settlements, a criminal whose cunning and cruelty had made him infamous. John's mind was focused, his senses alert. Every sound, every movement, every shadow was potentially a clue, a thread that could lead him to the quarry he had come to find. As he moved carefully through the canyons, John felt the familiar thrill of being alive in a world that demanded attention and respect. The rocks were jagged beneath his boots and the narrow paths twisted unpredictably, but he had long ago learned how to read the land. He could tell by the pattern of footprints in the soft soil or the broken branches along a trail whether an animal or a man had passed through recently. Yet as he followed a small winding stream, he began to sense something unusual. It was not the presence of his target nor the signs of another hunter. It was something subtler, a quiet awareness, almost like the land itself was alive and observing him. He paused, listening. The rustle of leaves and the creak of branches seemed ordinary, yet he could not shake the feeling that someone else was nearby. It was then that he saw her. A flash of movement across the rocks caught his eye. At first he thought it might be a deer, or perhaps a mountain lion, blending with the stone and shadow, but as he looked more closely he realized it was a woman. She moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, her steps deliberate yet silent. She was alert, scanning her surroundings, and her eyes met his for a brief instant. There was something in that look. Curiosity, caution, and a spark of recognition that he could not explain. He froze, unsure whether to approach or retreat. She did not flee, nor did she speak. It was as if the two of them understood, without words, that this encounter was unusual, significant even. John felt a strange pull, an unspoken connection that unsettled him. In all his years alone in the wilderness, he had never felt anything quite like this. The woman's presence was powerful, and yet she seemed at peace with the land around her, moving as if she belonged to it in a way he never could. For hours, John followed the trail he had come to track, yet his thoughts kept returning to the woman. He tried to focus on the task at hand, scanning the horizon for signs of his quarry, but the image of her lingered in his mind. The way she moved, the way she observed the land, the way her presence seemed to command attention without demanding it. He wondered who she was, why she was here, and how she had learned to navigate the wilderness so effortlessly. Each time he caught sight of her from a distance, his curiosity deepened, though he kept his distance, wary of alarming her. There was a silent understanding, he realized, that their paths were entwined in some way, even if he could not yet see how. The land itself seemed to acknowledge her presence as if she were a part of it, and John, for the first time in years, felt like an outsider looking in. As the day wore on, John found himself pausing more frequently, not because of fatigue, but because he wanted to observe her movements. She moved with a purpose, yet there was a sense of playfulness in her steps, a lightness that contrasted with the rugged terrain. She paused at small details, a cluster of wildflowers, a bird perched on a branch, a lizard darting across a sunlit rock. These small gestures captivated him. In all his time hunting and tracking, he had rarely allowed himself to notice the beauty of the world around him in this way. Now, every glance at her reminded him of the richness and depth of the land and of life itself. He began to understand that this encounter was not simply a chance meeting. It was a moment that could change the way he saw the world. Night fell, and the desert took on a different character. Shadows deepened, the temperature dropped, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures filled the air. John made camp under a rocky overhang, careful to leave a small fire smoldering for warmth while keeping it low enough to avoid attracting attention. His mind, however, was not on survival or the hunt. Instead, he found himself replaying every detail of the woman's movements, her expression, her gestures. He realized that his purpose in the wilderness, the pursuit of a man who had caused so much fear, suddenly seemed less urgent. There was a new focus now, one that involved understanding, observing, and perhaps even protecting this mysterious figure who had captured his attention so completely. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of rocky canyons, rustling leaves, and the shadow of the woman moving gracefully through the night. Morning came again, and John rose with a sense of anticipation. He packed his camp with practiced efficiency, though his thoughts were elsewhere. As he followed the path he had been tracking, he saw her once more. This time she was closer, and there was a subtle acknowledgement in her eyes, a recognition that perhaps he was no longer just a stranger in the wilderness. John realized that something had shifted between them. A silent, mutual understanding that had begun to take root in the brief time they had shared the land. He did not speak, for words seemed inadequate to capture the depth of this moment. Instead, he nodded slightly, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement, and continued on his way, though his heart felt lighter, more aware of the possibilities that lay ahead. Throughout the day, John could not shake the sense that his journey had taken an unexpected turn. The hunt, once the sole purpose of his expedition, had become secondary to the curiosity and connection he felt toward the woman. Every step he took, every creek he crossed, every ridge he climbed, seemed to carry the echo of her presence. He wondered about her life, her challenges, and the strength it must take to live alone in such a demanding environment. He thought about how their paths had crossed so unexpectedly, and how a single glance, a single shared moment, could ripple through one's life in ways that were impossible to predict. The wilderness, with all its dangers and beauty, had provided not only a challenge for the body, but also an opening for the heart. By late afternoon, John found himself in a narrow canyon where the sun cast long shadows across the rocky walls. He paused to rest, leaning against a cool stone and taking a deep breath. It was then that he realized he had not seen the woman for several hours. A pang of worry passed through him, not fear, but concern. She had moved like a shadow before, blending seamlessly with the land, but now he could not spot her. He wondered if she had simply gone her own way, or if perhaps she had sensed his observation and chosen to remain hidden. Either way, the experience had left its mark on him. He knew that he would be thinking of her long after this journey and perhaps long after the hunt itself had concluded. The presence of another human being, so independent, so attuned to the land, had awakened something in him that he did not fully understand. As the day faded into evening, John set up a modest camp, careful to remain concealed and safe. He built a small fire, its smoke rising gently into the twilight sky, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. The wilderness had always been a teacher, but today it had taught him more than survival and tracking. It had shown him the unexpected power of connection, the way a single encounter could alter one's perspective and priorities. He thought of the woman, her strength, her grace, and the mystery that surrounded her. For the first time in many years, he felt that the world was larger, more intricate, and more alive than he had allowed himself to believe. And he realized, with a quiet certainty, that this journey was no longer just about a hunt. It was about discovery, about connection, and perhaps about a path he had not yet dared to imagine. Night deepened, the stars emerging one by one in the clear desert sky. John lay back on his bedroll, listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the rocks and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. He thought about the day, about the unexpected encounter, and about the sense of wonder and curiosity it had sparked within him. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was filled with dreams of rocky cliffs, shaded canyons, and the silent, compelling presence of the woman who had appeared so suddenly in his life. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new challenges, new paths, and perhaps another encounter. But tonight he allowed himself to simply feel the quiet joy of having witnessed something extraordinary, something that might change the course of his journey in ways he could not yet understand. John woke early, before the sun had fully risen, the sky painted in pale pinks and soft oranges. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry earth and morning dew that had settled on the desert plants. He shook off the sleepiness, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the previous day's long trek. His mind immediately went to the woman he had seen. Ayanna, That was the name he had overheard her mutter softly while moving among the rocks. He didn't know much about her yet, but somehow the thought of her lingered in his mind like a gentle echo, refusing to fade. He packed his camp quietly, careful not to disturb the small birds hopping near the rocks, and began moving deeper into the canyon, following the narrow path that twisted like a ribbon through the rugged land. As he walked, he noticed signs of someone else's passage, subtle footprints pressed into soft sand. Broken branches carefully moved aside, and flattened patches of grass that suggested recent travel. John's eyes narrowed. He wasn't looking for danger, but for clues. Every detail mattered in the wilderness, and he had learned that small signs could reveal large truths. Then, ahead, he saw a flash of movement. It was her. She was trapped in a small crevice between two large boulders, her foot caught awkwardly as she tried to move forward. Panic flashed across her face, though she tried to hide it quickly. John's heart tightened. Without thinking, he rushed forward, careful not to startle her, and helped her free herself. Her eyes widened at first, surprise giving way to cautious relief. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice calm but firm, carrying the musical rhythm of her language, which was foreign to John, yet strangely comforting. He nodded, smiling gently, feeling an unfamiliar warmth at the sound. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice steady. She studied him for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her trust was cautious, measured, as though she had been betrayed before or had learned to be careful in a world that often treated her with fear or suspicion. John respected that. In his years of living in the wilderness, he had learned that trust was earned, not demanded. They stood there for a few moments, neither speaking much but both aware of each other's presence. The canyon was quiet, save for the faint trickle of a nearby stream and the distant call of a hawk circling above. John noticed the small details, the way she brushed dust from her clothing, the careful way she examined the rocks, the slight shift of her eyes that took in every movement. He realized she was observant not just of him but of the world around her, alert to every detail. Her movements were deliberate, measured, and full of purpose. It struck him that she must have spent much of her life learning to move in harmony with the land, understanding it in ways that he could only hope to. For the next several hours, they moved together. At first, it was out of necessity. John wanted to ensure she was safe, and she, though independent, seemed to allow his presence as a precaution. Slowly, however, their interaction changed. They began to communicate in small ways. Through gestures, simple words, and shared glances, John learned her name was Ayanna, and though language was a barrier, they managed to share ideas and intentions. She showed him a small spring hidden behind a cluster of rocks, and he watched in admiration as she knelt, cupped her hands, and drank deeply. Water was life in the desert, and she treated it with respect, never wasting a drop. John followed her example, and the simple act of drinking from the natural spring together created a silent bond, a shared understanding of survival and respect for the land. As the day passed, John found himself captivated by her knowledge and confidence. She knew which plants were safe to eat, which paths were easiest to navigate, and how to move quietly without leaving unnecessary traces. Her movements were efficient, yet there was a beauty in the way she interacted with the environment. John, who had spent years alone in the wilderness, was used to relying on his own experience, yet he found himself learning from her. He realized that the woman he had first thought was merely a stranger in the desert had much to teach him. And more than that, he was fascinated by her spirit, her independence, her courage, and her quiet strength. Around midday, they stopped to rest near a rocky outcrop that provided shade from the blazing sun. John took out his small, portable meal, a few dried fruits, bread, and water, and offered some to Ayanna. She shook her head politely but smiled, a gesture that seemed to bridge the gap between them. He ate slowly, watching her as she moved gracefully through the small clearing, inspecting plants and rocks as if cataloging everything she saw. There was a sense of rhythm in her movements, a harmony with the world that he found both calming and inspiring. For the first time in a long while, he felt he wasn't alone, not just physically but emotionally. Her presence seemed to fill a space he hadn't realized was empty, a quiet companionship he hadn't known he needed. As afternoon approached, John noticed subtle signs that they were not alone. Tracks in the sand suggested someone else had passed through earlier in the day. Though they were not in immediate danger, he felt a protective instinct rising within him. He realized he wanted to ensure Ayana's safety, not just out of obligation, but because her presence had begun to matter to him in a way he could not fully articulate. He watched her carefully, noting how she instinctively adjusted her movements, staying alert and cautious. He admired her skill and resilience, and he began to see her not as a mystery to solve, but as a person whose strength complemented his own, whose presence made the wilderness feel alive in a new way. By evening, the sky was painted with warm shades of orange, red, and purple, and shadows stretched long across the rocks. They had traveled far, yet John felt no fatigue, only a deep sense of focus and engagement. He realized that his journey, which had started as a hunt for another person, had shifted entirely. Now he found himself invested in this unexpected encounter, in understanding this woman and in the unspoken bond forming between them. As they set up a small camp for the night, John noticed that she chose a spot that was both safe and connected to the land, demonstrating an instinctive understanding of terrain that went beyond survival. It was a way of life, a philosophy he found both humbling and inspiring. Night fell and the desert transformed under the blanket of stars. John and Ayana sat near a small fire, its flames flickering softly, casting warm light on their faces. Though words were few, there was a silent communication between them. He observed her features in the gentle glow, the determined set of her jaw, the quiet intensity in her eyes, and the faint smile that occasionally appeared. She looked at him as well, with a mixture of curiosity and calm, and he felt an unusual peace settle over him. For all the dangers of the wilderness, for all the challenges of survival, this moment felt safe, rare, and profoundly significant. John thought back to the morning, to the chance encounter that had started it all. He realized that what he had expected, a simple hunt, had been replaced by something far richer and more complex. The wilderness, which had always been a place of challenge and solitude, had become a stage for connection and discovery. He understood, with a quiet certainty, that meeting Ayana had changed the nature of his journey entirely. He was no longer just a hunter of a man who had caused trouble. He had become a participant in something far more human, far more essential. As he lay down to rest that night, listening to the soft whisper of the wind and the distant sounds of desert life, John allowed himself to reflect on the day. He thought of the strength and independence of the woman he had helped, the knowledge she carried, and the quiet wisdom in her movements. He felt a mix of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper, a connection that was slowly growing, delicate but unmistakable. Sleep came gradually, filled with dreams of sunlit canyons, hidden springs, and the quiet, compelling presence of Ayana. For the first time in a long while, John felt that the wilderness was not just a place of survival or conquest, but a place of wonder, of learning, and of unexpected encounters that could shift the course of a life in ways that no map or trail could predict. The next morning, the sun rose slowly, casting soft, golden light over the rugged canyons and dusty trails. John woke with a sense of purpose, yet his mind was no longer only on the hunt. Ayana's presence lingered like a quiet hum in his thoughts, and he realized that protecting her had become as important as anything else in the wilderness. She was already awake, sitting near the small spring they had discovered, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. When she noticed him, she nodded briefly, a small acknowledgement that seemed to say, "I know you are here, and I trust you, in some measure." John returned the nod and moved toward her, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and responsibility. As they continued their journey, John began to notice how independent and capable Ayana truly was. She moved with confidence across uneven rocks, leapt over small streams with ease, and could spot signs of animals or people long before he did. Her knowledge of the land was extraordinary, and John felt himself learning from her with every step. He had survived alone in the wilderness for many years, relying on his own skills, but watching Ayana reminded him that survival was not just about strength. It was about understanding, patience, and harmony with the land. He realized that she had spent her life learning these lessons in ways that no man or book could teach him. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon where the shadows were long and the air cool. Here, the first signs of potential danger appeared. Tracks in the sand suggested that others had passed through recently. John's instincts told him they were not in immediate peril, but the presence of another person, or perhaps a group, added a layer of tension to the otherwise peaceful day. He glanced at Ayanna and noticed that she, too, had recognized the signs. She paused, crouching slightly, and scanned the surroundings with careful precision. The unspoken understanding between them grew stronger. He didn't need to say anything. She knew he would watch her back, and he knew she could guide him through the terrain. As the day wore on, John realized that Ayanna's knowledge extended beyond just survival. She understood the subtle rhythms of nature, the shift in the wind, the sounds of animals, the way the sun hit certain rocks to reveal hidden paths. It was like watching a master at work. John marveled at her skill and began to understand that this journey was no longer just about a pursuit of a criminal. It was about learning, observing, and sharing a mutual respect for the land. He felt a growing admiration for her courage, resourcefulness, and quiet determination. Every gesture she made seemed purposeful, each step calculated yet graceful, and he realized that he had begun to rely on her as much as she might be relying on him. During a brief rest near a cluster of tall, weathered rocks, John offered her some of the dried fruits and bread from his pack. She shook her head politely but smiled, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge the kindness without creating a sense of obligation. The simplicity of the act, the sharing of food in the open wilderness, brought a quiet warmth to the moment. John noticed the way her eyes softened slightly as she observed the landscape, how her hands gently touched the plants and stones, and he felt a deep respect growing within him. This was not just survival. It was a connection to the world and to each other, a mutual understanding that words could hardly capture. As afternoon settled, the tracks they had noticed earlier became more pronounced. Someone else had clearly passed through the canyon in the last few hours. John's protective instincts kicked in immediately. He kept a close eye on their surroundings, scanning for signs of movement, while Ayanna moved with alert efficiency. She guided him along a path that kept them concealed from view, ducking behind boulders and slipping through narrow spaces where they would be invisible to anyone who might be following. John felt a sense of pride in their teamwork. He had learned to survive alone, but navigating danger together added a new dimension to his skills. He realized that the bond between them was growing stronger, fueled by trust, reliance, and shared experience. Even as the potential danger loomed, there were moments of lightness between them. They paused by a small stream where the water sparkled in the sunlight. Ayanna knelt and scooped water into her hands, drinking deeply, and John followed her example. He watched her with fascination, noting the ease and comfort with which she moved through the environment. There was a rhythm to her actions, a harmony that made the wilderness feel more like home than ever before. For John, who had spent years in solitude, these moments felt rare and precious. He found himself speaking to her more freely, sharing small stories from his past, while she responded with gestures, expressions, and occasional words that he could understand. As evening approached, they found a safe place to set up camp. Ayanna chose the spot carefully, ensuring it was sheltered, hidden from view, and connected to natural resources like water and firewood. John admired her instinctive understanding of the terrain. They built a small fire together, and the warmth of the flames seemed to deepen the sense of connection between them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had navigated the dangers of the day, relied on each other's skills, and survived in harmony with the land. Yet more than that, he realized that their shared experience had created an unspoken bond that went beyond mere survival. Night fell, and the desert came alive with sounds he had come to know well. The distant calls of nocturnal animals, the soft rustle of wind through the rocks, and the occasional whisper of the stream nearby. John and Ayanna sat near the fire, exchanging small gestures and smiles, learning to communicate in ways that transcended language. John felt a warmth in his chest that he could not fully explain. He had always valued independence, solitude, and self-reliance, yet he realized that companionship, even in its quietest form, added depth to life in a way he had never experienced. During the night, John thought about the events of the day, the potential danger they had faced together, the skills they had shared, and the moments of quiet reflection had all left an impression on him. He realized that he no longer thought of Ayanna as simply a stranger in the wilderness. She had become a partner in survival, a teacher in ways he had not anticipated, and someone whose presence he had come to value deeply. The wilderness, which had always been a challenge and a place of solitude, had transformed into a space of connection, learning, and trust. John understood that the bond forming between them was delicate, yet strong enough to shape the days ahead. As he lay on his bedroll listening to the soft sounds of the night, John reflected on the subtle shifts that had taken place. He had come seeking a quarry, a single goal that had occupied his mind for weeks. Now his focus had expanded, deepened, and shifted entirely. He was no longer merely a hunter tracking a target. He was a man navigating relationships, trust, and the growing realization that another person's presence could change everything.
Ayanna had taught him, without words, the value of observation, patience, and respect.
He realized that these lessons were as important as any skill he had learned in years of surviving alone. Morning came again, and John woke with the same mixture of anticipation and reflection. He watched Ayanna as she moved about the camp, preparing for the day with care and attention.
He noticed how she selected paths carefully, how she treated the plants and rocks around her, and how naturally she adapted to the land.
He realized that she was not just surviving, she was thriving. Her independence and skill reminded him of the possibilities of life when one is attuned to the world, attentive to its rhythms, and willing to move with care and respect. John felt inspired, and he knew that the day ahead would challenge him to continue learning, observing, and growing alongside her. The day unfolded with moments of both calm and tension. John and Ayanna moved through the wilderness, navigating narrow paths, climbing rocky slopes, and observing signs of life all around them. The tracks of others continued to appear occasionally, but John felt confident in their ability to remain unseen and safe. He admired Ayanna's instincts, her confidence, and the way she moved without hesitation or fear. At the same time, he recognized the need to remain vigilant. The wilderness could be unforgiving, and even a small mistake could have consequences. Yet the shared experience strengthened their connection, creating a sense of mutual reliance and trust that neither had expected. By late afternoon, they arrived at a hidden clearing surrounded by towering cliffs. It was a place of natural beauty and safety, where water trickled from a small spring and the rocks provided shelter from wind and sun. John and Ayanna rested here, taking in the beauty of their surroundings. They shared moments of quiet conversation, exchanging gestures, simple words, and small smiles. The bond between them had grown from initial curiosity to something deeper, a connection built on respect, shared experience, and the understanding that each had skills, knowledge, and strengths that complemented the other. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and red, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had come to the wilderness for a single purpose, yet he had discovered far more. The richness of connection, the value of learning from another person, and the beauty of moving through the world with someone who understood and respected it as deeply as he did. That night, as the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky, he lay on his bedroll thinking of the day's events. He thought of Ayanna, her courage, her knowledge, and her quiet strength. And he realized, with a growing certainty, that the journey ahead would not be about solitude, but about companionship, trust, and the shared adventure of life in the wilderness. The morning sun rose slowly over the jagged cliffs, casting long shadows across the canyon. John Harper woke to the crisp, cool air brushing against his face, and for the first time in many days he didn't feel the urgency of a hunt pressing on him. Instead, he felt something new, a quiet tension inside his chest, a pull he could not ignore. Ayanna was already awake, moving silently among the rocks as if she had been born to the land. She paused when she saw him watching, a faint smile touching her lips, though her eyes remained thoughtful and serious. That look seemed to say something beyond words, a gentle reminder that the wilderness was as much about choice and connection as it was about survival. John realized he was no longer focused solely on his original goal. The quarry he had come to track felt distant, almost insignificant compared to the bond that had grown between him and Ayanna. They began moving through a narrow path, the sunlight glinting off the canyon walls and warming the dust beneath their boots. John observed Ayanna closely, noting how she chose each step with care, balanced on uneven rocks with ease, and listened to the wind for any hint of danger. She was alert, cautious, yet calm, her presence both grounding and inspiring. John reflected on the days they had spent together, the shared water at the spring, the quiet moments of learning from one another, the gentle understanding that grew without words. He understood, more clearly now than ever, that their relationship had shifted from mere acquaintance to something far deeper. He had come to rely on her, not just for guidance in the wilderness, but for the quiet strength she brought into his life.
As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change.
The canyon narrowed, and steep cliffs rose sharply on either side. John noticed tracks in the sand ahead that suggested another presence, someone moving with intent but not immediately threatening. His instincts urged caution, yet he also felt a subtle shift in his priorities. He glanced at Ayanna and realized she had noticed the same tracks. There was a mutual understanding in their silent glance. They would move carefully, but they would move together. The day's journey had become a test, not only of survival but of the trust and reliance that had grown between them. Every step, every cautious pause reinforced the bond that had begun in fleeting moments of curiosity. By late afternoon, they reached a small, secluded plateau that offered a breathtaking view of the canyon below. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and dry earth, and the sunlight created warm, golden highlights across the rocks. John paused, letting his gaze wander over the vista, and felt a sense of clarity. Here, removed from the pressures of his original hunt, he could reflect on the choices before him. He knew that he was facing a subtle but profound decision. He could continue the pursuit that had brought him into the wilderness, or he could embrace the unexpected connection with Ayanna that had grown into something he could not ignore. Ayanna noticed his pause and approached him, her eyes calm but curious. She gestured toward the distant canyon and then toward him, a silent question in her expression. John realized that she, too, understood the gravity of the moment. This was not merely about survival or following a trail. It was about choices that could shape their future. He felt a warmth in his chest and a clarity in his mind. He knew that leaving her, returning to his solitary life, would feel hollow. The wilderness, once a space of challenge and conquest, had become a place of discovery, teaching him lessons he had never expected to learn. The bond between them had created a new perspective, one that valued connection, trust, and mutual respect above all else. As evening approached, John and Ayanna set up a small camp in a sheltered alcove. The fading light painted the rocks in soft shades of orange and pink, and the air grew cooler. They worked together in harmony, gathering firewood, arranging a safe sleeping space, and sharing a modest meal. John noticed how naturally they moved together, each action complementing the other. He realized that their relationship had grown beyond words and gestures. It was now an unspoken rhythm of understanding, a partnership forged in trust and mutual reliance. Sitting by the fire, he watched Ayanna as she tended to the flames, her movements graceful and intentional. There was a quiet strength in her presence, a calm assurance that grounded him and gave him courage. Night fell, and the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky. John felt a deep sense of reflection as he gazed upward, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the quarry he had originally sought, of the solitary life he had once embraced, and of the unexpected path that had unfolded before him. Ayanna sat nearby, her face illuminated by the fire, her expression serene yet thoughtful. In that moment, John realized that his priorities had shifted entirely. The wilderness had taught him the importance of observation, patience, and adaptability, but it had also taught him the value of connection, empathy, and partnership. He understood that the strongest bonds are forged not through conquest, but through shared experience, mutual respect, and quiet trust. As the night deepened, they spoke in soft tones, sharing stories from their pasts, memories of family, and lessons learned from the land. John discovered that Ayanna's life had been shaped by resilience, independence, and a profound understanding of nature. She, in turn, learned from John's experiences, from his knowledge of tracking, survival, and observation. Together they wove a tapestry of understanding, bridging the gap between their worlds. The conversation, though simple, carried profound meaning. It was not about words alone, but about listening, understanding, and valuing one another's perspective. The trust that had grown between them over days of travel and shared experience now felt unshakable. The following morning, John awoke with a sense of determination. The decision he had been contemplating was now clear in his mind. He could not return to his solitary life, leaving Ayana behind. The thought of separation brought a hollow ache to his heart, and he realized that the wilderness had become more than a place of survival. It had become a space of emotional and spiritual awakening. Ayana, sensing his inner reflection, gave a small smile, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge the unspoken understanding between them. John knew that his choice was not only about personal desire, but also about honoring the trust and connection that had developed it. As they continued their journey, the terrain became more challenging. Steep cliffs, narrow paths, and sudden drops required careful navigation. Yet John felt a growing confidence in their partnership. Each obstacle was met with coordination and mutual support. Ayana led with intuition, while John applied his experience and knowledge. They moved together seamlessly, an unspoken team navigating both physical and emotional challenges. The sense of reliance and trust between them strengthened with every step, deepening their connection and reinforcing the choice John had made to prioritize their bond above all else. By afternoon, they reached a high ridge that overlooked a broad canyon. The view was breathtaking, stretching for miles in every direction. The colors of the earth, rocks, and vegetation created a patchwork of life and beauty. John paused to take it all in, and he felt a sense of awe mixed with gratitude. It was here, in this vast and magnificent landscape, that he realized the full impact of the decision he had made. The wilderness had given him more than experience. It had given him perspective, humility, and the understanding that true strength lies not only in skill or survival, but in connection, respect, and shared purpose. As the sun began to set, John and Ayana found a sheltered spot to rest. They sat quietly, watching the sky turn shades of orange, pink, and purple. John felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had chosen a path guided not by obligation or duty, but by the heart. Ayana's presence was a steadying force, reminding him that life's most meaningful choices often emerge from unexpected encounters and shared experiences. They shared a simple meal, speaking softly and laughing quietly at small stories or observations from the day. The moments, though ordinary in their simplicity, carried extraordinary significance. That night, as John lay on his bedroll listening to the gentle rustle of wind through the rocks and the distant calls of nocturnal animals, he reflected on the journey so far. The choice he had made to value connection over solitary pursuit had changed everything. The wilderness, which had once been a place of challenge and isolation, had become a space of growth, learning, and partnership. Ayana, with her quiet strength, deep knowledge, and gentle presence, had shown him that life's most profound lessons often come from trust, understanding, and shared experience. John understood with quiet certainty that the path ahead would be shaped not by the hunt he had once pursued, but by the bond he had chosen to nurture. Sleep came slowly but peacefully, filled with dreams of sunlit canyons, hidden springs, and the silent yet powerful presence of Ayana. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn his journey had taken and a quiet excitement for the days ahead. The decision he had made to follow his heart and stay connected was not just about the wilderness or survival or even companionship. It was about embracing the unexpected, trusting in the bonds that form in quiet, meaningful ways, and discovering a life that was richer, fuller, and more connected than he had ever imagined. The morning light came softly over the canyon, spilling gold across the rocks and warming the cool desert air. John Harper woke slowly, listening to the quiet sounds of the wilderness. Birds called from distant cliffs, and a gentle breeze whispered through the sagebrush. Today, he felt a sense of calm determination unlike anything he had experienced before. The hunt that had brought him into this wilderness no longer mattered. What mattered now was the life he had chosen, the connection he had found, and the future he hoped to build with Ayana. He watched her as she moved gracefully around their small camp, her eyes alert but serene, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude for having crossed paths with her. Ayana had been his guide, his teacher, and now something far more important, a companion whose strength, intelligence, and spirit had changed the course of his life. John thought about the days they had spent together, the quiet mornings by the spring, the careful navigation of dangerous paths, the laughter and conversation in the evenings, and the silent understanding that had grown between them. All of these moments had built a bond that went beyond words. and John knew he could not imagine facing the world without her by his side. The wilderness had given him lessons in survival, yes, but it had also taught him something far deeper: the power of trust, connection, and the choice to open one's heart. They set out together that morning, moving through the canyon with confidence and care. The sun was high, and the land around them seemed alive with energy. Birds flew overhead, the wind carried the scent of flowers and dry earth, and the distant mountains rose like silent guardians. John and Ayana moved together seamlessly, instinctively knowing where to step, how to avoid hazards, and how to stay alert. They shared glances, small smiles, and quiet gestures that spoke more than words ever could. The trust between them was complete. He realized that the lessons of the wilderness were not only about navigation or survival. They were about partnership, respect, and understanding the rhythm of life with someone else. By midday, they reached a plateau that overlooked a broad valley below. The view was breathtaking, stretching for miles in every direction. Sunlight reflected off distant rocks, and a small stream glimmered like a silver ribbon cutting through the earth. John paused, taking a deep breath, and felt a sense of peace settle over him. This place, this moment represented not only the physical beauty of the land, but the emotional journey he had undertaken. He had entered the wilderness a solitary man, focused on a single goal, and now he found himself transformed by connection, trust, and the quiet power of shared experience. Ayana joined him, her eyes bright with curiosity and warmth. She spoke softly, pointing to distant tracks and features in the landscape. John listened carefully, appreciating not only the information but the care with which she shared it. Her knowledge was profound, built from years of observing the land and moving with purpose through it. He realized that she had given him more than guidance. She had given him understanding, perspective, and the realization that life was richer when shared. Every step they had taken together had strengthened their bond, and he knew that the path ahead would be one they traveled side by side. As afternoon settled in, they navigated a series of narrow paths along steep cliffs. John marveled at Ayana's agility and skill, moving effortlessly across challenging terrain. He felt a quiet admiration for her resilience and confidence. At the same time, he recognized his own growth. He was no longer simply a man moving through the wilderness alone. He had learned to observe, adapt, and move with care, not just for his own survival, but to protect and support someone he deeply cared for. Their teamwork was seamless, built from days of shared experience and mutual reliance. Each obstacle they overcame together strengthened not only their skill, but their connection. By late afternoon, they arrived at a hidden grove surrounded by towering rocks and shaded by tall trees. A small spring bubbled quietly nearby, creating a serene oasis in the rugged landscape. They rested there, sharing water and simple food, and took a moment to reflect on the journey they had undertaken. John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come to the wilderness for a hunt, expecting solitude and challenge, yet he had found companionship, trust, and the beginnings of a life that he could not have imagined. Ayana, sitting beside him, seemed equally at peace. Her calm strength and quiet presence were as comforting as the warm sun and gentle breeze. As the sun began to set, John and Ayana prepared a small fire. The flames flickered and cast warm light across their faces, and the sky turned brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. They sat together in quiet contentment, sharing small gestures and smiles. Words were not necessary. The silence between them spoke volumes. John felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for Ayana's presence but for the lessons the wilderness had provided. He understood that their bond was rare and valuable, built from trust, respect, and shared experience. It was a connection that would shape their lives in ways neither could have predicted when they first met. Night fell and the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, sparkling like diamonds above the canyon. John lay back on his bedroll, gazing upward, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken. He thought of the lessons learned, the dangers navigated, and the quiet moments of connection that had transformed his perspective. Ayana sat nearby, her eyes reflecting the starlight, calm and attentive. He realized that their journey together was far from over, yet he felt a deep sense of certainty. They would continue to explore, to learn from each other, and to face the challenges of the wilderness together. The bond they had forged was not fleeting. It was a foundation for a life of shared discovery, trust, and companionship. In the days that followed, John and Ayana continued to navigate the rugged terrain, facing occasional challenges with skill and patience. Each obstacle, whether a steep climb, a narrow path, or uncertain terrain, was met with collaboration and mutual support. Their trust in each other grew with every shared decision, every careful step, and every small victory. John recognized that the strength of their connection was as important as any survival skill. He learned to rely not only on his own experience but on her wisdom, and he realized that the lessons of partnership were just as vital as the lessons of the wilderness itself. One afternoon, they reached a hidden valley where wildflowers bloomed among rocks and small streams meandered through the earth. John paused, taking in the beauty of the scene, and felt a deep sense of peace. He turned to Ayana and saw that she too was moved by the tranquility. They spent the day exploring the valley, learning from each other's knowledge, and sharing moments of quiet laughter and discovery. John realized that the journey had transformed him. He had entered the wilderness seeking a goal outside himself, yet he had discovered something far more meaningful: the value of connection, trust, and shared experience. As evening approached, they returned to their campsite. John felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that he had chosen a path guided by the heart. The wilderness, which had once been a place of challenge and solitude, had become a space of growth, learning, and companionship. Ayana's presence had shown him the power of trust, the importance of respect, and the quiet strength found in partnership. Together, they sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and the stars appear in the sky. Words were few, but the connection between them was profound, built on shared experience and mutual understanding. That night, John reflected on the journey as he lay under the stars. He thought of the path that had brought him here, from a solitary hunt to a life shared with someone who had become essential to his heart and soul. He understood that the choices he had made, guided by trust and connection, had created a life richer and fuller than he could have imagined. The wilderness had given him lessons in survival, yes, but more importantly, it had given him understanding, companionship, and love. Ayana's presence had transformed his world, and he knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following morning, they packed their camp with ease, moving through the land with the quiet confidence that comes from experience and trust. Each step felt purposeful, not just for survival, but for the continuation of a life they were building together. John felt a deep sense of joy and fulfillment. The journey, once defined by a solitary goal, had become a shared adventure, rich with learning, growth, and mutual respect. He realized that the wilderness had offered him not only the thrill of challenge, but also the opportunity to discover what truly mattered in life. As they moved forward, the land unfolded before them like a living map, filled with paths to explore, hidden springs to discover, and quiet moments to share. John and Ayana walked side by side, their footsteps in harmony with one another, their presence in the wilderness both respectful and confident. Each moment together reinforced the trust and bond that had grown between them, creating a foundation for a life defined not by solitude or conquest, but by connection, understanding, and shared experience. By the time evening settled, they found a peaceful spot to rest. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm light across the canyon. John and Ayana shared a simple meal, their conversation light and filled with laughter. The fire crackled softly, and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. John realized that this moment, quiet, ordinary, yet profound, was the culmination of a journey that had transformed him completely. He had entered the wilderness seeking a hunt, but he had found a companion, a partner, and a life filled with trust, love, and shared discovery. As they settled to sleep under the canopy of stars, John reflected on everything that had led to this point. The challenges, the lessons, the shared dangers, and the quiet moments of connection had all contributed to a bond that was strong, enduring, and life-changing. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Ayana, for the land, and for the journey that had brought them together. Sleep came easily, filled with dreams of sunlit valleys, sparkling streams, and the shared adventures that awaited them. In the heart of the wilderness, John knew one thing with certainty. He had found something far greater than any hunt could offer, a life shared, a heart trusted, and a future built together.